You're driving back to Las Vegas from Haver, Montana after a stand-up comedy gig at a small bar. What do you learn about yourself on that drive back?
Um, the joke that I learned in the bar was it's not called Haver, it's Haver. We don't want her, you can have her. Um, what did I learn on that drive back? It was like five drunks who were sitting in this seedy old bar, and I was there to entertain them. Nobody knew there was going to be a comedy show, and I did my best material, and nobody laughed. It was just like this was miserable. So I have a 20-hour drive back to Las Vegas, and I stopped at a truck stop, and this is back when CDs were still sold like as audiobooks, and there was something there by Brian Tracy on goal setting. Like, oh, that's the only thing that's like even interesting, so I buy that. And he starts talking through this process of setting goals, and he says essentially, write it down as though it were currently happening for you. So I start writing down what I want my life to look like as though it currently exists. Um, and that's when I started the real process of dreaming up what my future life can be. So what did I discover about myself? Um, I discovered I wanted a lot that wasn't already existing. So we can go into any specifics of what details you want there, but that was the story.
Do you remember what you wrote down?
Yeah, the most impactful one was I have an adorable fetch playing boxer who jumps on my bed and licks my face in the morning. I get back to Las Vegas, and there's a newspaper sitting in the driveway. I grab it and I'm like, that's weird. I don't subscribe to any newspapers, but whatever. And I take it and I throw it in the recycle bin. The classified ads section slips away from the newspaper. And it reminds me of this thought about this dog. I'm like, oh yeah. So I grab it and it says this ad is the only ad in this paper. It's like a little local newspaper, the Green Valley Gazette, it was called. And the only ad says, word for word, adorable fetch playing boxer free to get home. So I call up the number. It's this awesome dog, and she lived to be 17 years. Just about a year and a half ago, she passed away.
Wow, that's wow. That feels like fate. That
It
is.
was. I mean, the first day that I adopted her, she jumped on my bed and started licking my face. Like, it could not have been more of a manifesting, like, I'm not too woo woo, but if there's anything that's like, I've created my life or this thing for myself, then that's a great example of it happening.
Wow, that definitely feels like you're aligned with yourself then. So, I mean, the main reason why I wanted to have you on the show is you've done some incredible work and have done some incredible physical feats with the amount of climbing that you've done and the climbs that you've done all across the world. But taking a step back, I obviously want to get into the specifics of all those climbs. Taking a step back though, when you first started climbing, what was the feeling that you got, just doing the work, not having any goals? How did it allow you to create your own world for yourself just to live in?
So climbing started for me when I was a kind of middle school, but more high school student. And there was this camp up in Washington State that I went to, and there was this group of guys that I admired, and I really wanted to be like those guys. They're just cool dudes, and they enjoyed their life. And coming from Las Vegas, I didn't see a lot of people who lived with that kind of passion. So climbing more than uh, the I want to do this physical sport that calls to me. It was like I want to be like these people who are doing this thing. So to answer your question of how did it like create this realm of freedom for myself, it allowed me to explore my personality and who I am as a human being. And I fell in love with the sport, yes, but more impactful was it allowed me to explore who I wanted to become as a character.
Did it feel ever at all like you needed to escape from Las Vegas? How was the environment of Las Vegas that you were living in?
I've always thought that I don't belong in Las Vegas. I'm here right now, but I've always thought that I don't fit in here. I grew up in split between Vancouver, British Columbia, where I'd spend my summers, and Las Vegas, where I spend the rest of the year. And while in Vegas, I would always think, I want to be there. And it kind of put this thread throughout my personality of wherever I am, there's like someplace else that I would choose to be. It kind of created this pattern. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why I went after, like, go after climbs. Like getting to the top of a mountain, you only spend 10, 15 minutes, maybe an hour on the top of the climb. But if you're always sitting in this existence of like, I want to be somewhere else, and you put that mountaintop as that thing, it just fits for me to constantly be chasing after this big goal. And I only get to spend a little bit of time there. And once I accomplish it, I'm like, okay, now I can pick some other mountaintop and want to be there, and make it happen. Work to make it happen to get there.
Did you enjoy life in British Columbia? Did that environment feel like did it suit you better?
It did feel like it suited me better. I felt like I fit in there. I had a better group of friends there. It just seemed like a more natural fit environmentally, socially, every aspect of it. It fit. Um, yeah. So that pattern, I think, is it became a part of why mountains are or became a thing to chase, instead of just being settled with where I'm at. We often think like, what's the psychological reason somebody goes after a big thing that's sort of unusual? And I think this was a large part of it for me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's honestly something that I always wonder because I'm not a climber at all, but I'm very fascinated by the sport and the type of people that do climb to those types of levels because you definitely do have to be very dedicated and obsessed to a certain degree. But it's fascinating to hear you say that because there is, just from an outsider's perspective, there does seem like a massive psychological and emotional side to climbing. Um,
There absolutely is. And some people say, like, dude, you're crazy. And they mean it. Like, you're demented. Why would you put your life at risk to go after some meaningless piece of rock in the sky? And we can dive more deeply into that. But that's a part of it. What I just explained is a part of it for how I developed this desire to go climb.
yeah, that's awesome. So fast forwarding now, it's 2007, and you attempted to summit Aconcagua in Argentina, but you failed. But
Hmm.
it's also at that moment that you cemented the goal that you were going to climb the highest summits in all seven continents. Those are two very opposite facts that I just stated there. You failed,
Yep.
but you set this crazy goal for yourself. What allowed you to have that type of confidence and belief?
Uh, it wasn't confidence. It wasn't belief. It was, I'm pissed off. Like, nobody can tell me I can't go do a thing that I want to do. I wanted to make it to the top. And then it was out of defiance that, like, not only am I going to come back here and finish this climb, but I'm also going to climb all the other ones. Like, I didn't even know that the seven summits were a big deal until I was at Aconcagua. And after, just chatting with other climbers and being at base camp and learning, like, meeting some other people who were there going after it, that's when I'm like, okay, there's even a bigger deal than the tallest mountain in South America. And when I got my butt whooped on that climb, that was when I'm like, I'm going to not just come back and prove to myself that I could make it up this mountain, but I'm going to prove to myself that I can make it up all of them.
Why weren't you able to summit? Was it from the environment or was it something on your end where you weren't able to?
Aconcagua is a 18-day climb, maybe 14 if you're really hustling. Um, on the way in, we met this guy named Stefan, who's a German climber, and he was trying to round up a team to climb a particular part of the route that's called the Polish Glacier, and that's a 60-degree, like, blue ice, sheet ice. Blue ice meaning, like, you could take an ice axe to it and whack as hard as you could, and your ice axe would just ping right off of it. It's super slippery and it's bulletproof. Um, so he wants to go up this route, which is just a unique way of climbing, uh, compared to the standard route. the traditional route, and none of us are really like psyched to go with him. And then he finally finds a buddy. They make it the part of the way up, and they decide to split apart. Stefan gets too scared on that ice, and his partner wanted to continue climbing. So they split up, and on Stefan's descent, he falls, and he slides down, and he passes away from the fall. He hits some rocks. So several of our days were taken up by this trauma of like experiencing, watching his body being recovered and dealing with the emotions of this person that we just met, kind of a friend, like passing away right in front of us. It's the first death that I had been up and close and personal with. So that set us back a few days. We continued to climb and got up to the high camp. My two climbing partners got altitude sickness, and they decided to descend. So there was one extra day possible where another climber, who was also from Germany but not connected to Stefan, his name was Frank, and Frank and I said, well, we both have good energy, let's go for it. We wake up the next morning, and there's this huge lenticular cloud, it's kind of like shaped like a spoon. It's a really smooth, layered cloud that's above the mountaintop. And I had read in several books that if you see that cloud, it means that there's a massive storm coming. Get down as fast as you can. So there's this group of mostly Italian climbers with a local guide from Argentina who were gearing up and getting ready to go. And I said, guys, look at this huge cloud. Like, it's not a good day to climb. We got to descend. And they said, oh, we're going to go after it anyway. So they continued up, and Frank and I descended down. And I believe that Frank and I were the last people to see them alive as an entire group. They got caught in a storm that came in. 3 of them passed away. And then it became like every climber on the mountain was a part of this rescue operation to get them down. So it was, why didn't I summit? It was a traumatic experience overall. And that's what happened. And then after that, we were out of food, out of fuel, out of energy, and just like, this is too much. This is too intense to continue.
I know you've read Into Thin Air, which chronicles the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. Obviously, that experience. I know when you were in high school, you also had a close friend who passed away. What is your relationship with death looked like, and how has it evolved over the years, especially with the amount of climbing that you do and knowing that death or serious injuries is, a reality?
My relationship with death now is acceptance, and it's a part of living. It's actually a highlight for being alive. It makes every moment richer because I'm comfortable with it. I didn't used to be that way. Another reason psychologically that I think that I started climbing was in defiance of death. You mentioned my high school friend who passed away. It was around the same time, shortly after that happening, that I really got involved with climbing. And I think that there is something about standing up next to something that could kill me, like a cliff face or a storm, looking at it dead in the eye and like saying to it with your spirit, you're not getting me, like fighting against it. In that spirit, it felt good and it felt right for me to go climb a mountain to this thing that could kill me, get to the top and be like, ha, death, I did it, I got it. And then descend safely to be like essentially flipping the middle finger at death itself. And that was a lot of my motivation for climbing. Yet, in doing that, all I did was put myself up more and more against death and seeing others who would pass away. I've seen 17 deaths over the course of my climbing career, either tangentially related or people who I've known have passed away. And that has eventually culminated with needing to resolve a lot of these issues in the context of therapy. Through be through like the decompression of all these climbs, through meditation, yoga. I've now come to a place where like this is something that I think my spirit needed to see and experience so that I could be comfortable with it to make life just more joyful and more like uh, if I can be comfortable with my own death, there's nothing that I can approach in life that's going to scare me. And I think that learning that is the ultimate lesson that I could take from the mountains.
I love how you speak a lot about meditation and breath work.
Mm.
And I've heard you speak about how when it comes to climbing, you really have to be focused on your one breath and taking one step at a time. And you say the process of moving is ultimately a mind game. On clear days, you're intimidated by how far you actually have to go. On days below visibility, you're discouraged by how far you've actually gone or how far you have left to go. How do you keep yourself going? Well, it's a matter of breathing. And another thing that I've heard you say that is really, really interesting, and you're talking about this from like a literal point of view. You say that you can breathe energy into certain parts of your body. I'm
Mm.
curious to know what the thought process is there and how you do that.
Have you ever like banged your toe or hit your funny bone in your elbow really hard?
Yep.
What do you do in that moment?
I focus on the pain.
You focus on the pain. Have you ever like held your breath when it happens as you're focusing on the pain? You're like,
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
like tense up, right?
Yeah.
And then what's the natural next thing that we do?
Continue to focus on the pain.
Have you ever just like, in order to like make it feel less painful, have you ever just been like,
Okay. Yeah. All the
you
time.
take
Yeah.
this huge deep like breath and you fill your lungs with oxygen as you focus on that pain. So essentially, what you're doing in that moment is you're sending energy from your lungs to that painful spot in order to help to dissipate or to dissolve the pain. So when I say one step, one breath, that came from a very real place of like, I cannot physically take another step and I'm on top of a mountain, like unable to move because of how exhausted my muscles are. So if I took one breath, I could like and focus on the pain of what's going on in that leg. I learned both meditation and this sort of like mind body connection by being forced to. Like, I'm going to die in this storm unless I know how to figure out how to energize this leg. And I realized that I could create this pacing of focusing on the pain that's there in the leg and then breathing and sort of just like sending the intention to it. This might sound like weird to somebody who's very science oriented or analytical, but a lot of science is now, like with many things, starting to support this being a reality. Um, Now, is it possible that maybe just like by breathing deep, we just send the same oxygen to the entirety of our body? Yeah, but this also helps us to learn how to control our minds and our thoughts. So for me, it works. And if you have any like great yoga instructor, they're going to tell you that like your abs hurt while you're in plank, breathe into that spot and direct your energy to it, and it helps you to overcome the pain. So whether it's like a result or a direct effect that we're having, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that it works.
The mind and body are definitely in constant unison working together. And I've
Yes.
definitely had many, many experiences where I've been able to see that play out in real time. So I think that's very fascinating. You've also said, which I think is really interesting, as a result of your climbing, but also your meditation and your breathing, is that you've said that you've been able to lengthen the time between the stimulus and your response to the stimulus. So, relating that to one of your other climbs, talk to me about climbing Puncak Jaya in Indonesia. What happened when you were trapped between a mine in tribal warfare.
that's that's just funny to hear. Like it's a real thing, but it's just such a like unusual experience. We had finished the climb. It's a 10-day journey or so through the jungle, and then a 1-day climb up to 16,000 feet above sea level, and then back down to this base camp. So we finished it. We get back down to base camp, and that evening, my buddy's shoes, his boots, actually a few other different climbers who were with us, their boots get stolen by the guides who were with us. They disappear. And if you can imagine being in this canyon with probably 3,000-foot cliffs on each side of us, and it's a long canyon, so there's two directions that we could go. One was the direction that we came in from, and the other is in this direction of the world's largest gold mine. The gold mine tells us you can't come out this way, and they've told us this like before we ever started climbing. Like we're not in tourism, we're not a transport company, so we're fine with that. We can't leave that way. So we got to go back out the way that we came. My buddies don't have their boots, so they got to go out barefoot. We're trying to figure out how we can like get the boots back. But as we're trying to like do some scouting missions back from where we came from to see if we can find where the boots ended up, and maybe get them back, we see these bows and arrows being shot between warring tribes. And there's like blow darts and guys running through the jungle here, like shooting at each other. So we get back to this base camp, and there are these like tin shed, like sides of containers, shipping containers from the gold mine that had been sort of tumbled down the mine or down the canyon, and we lean those up against a cliff, and we basically get pinned down there for about 5 days while we're waiting for this war to settle down on one side. We're going up to the mine trying to ask them to let us through, but they've got their machine guns and they're like, no, you guys can't come through here. You knew this all along. Like waving us back down. So we get essentially pinned down. I get on a satellite phone and I call up my brother and I'm like, Mike, like I'm not in an emergency situation right now, but I want to give you my GPS coordinates in case something happens, like you at least know where we're at. Quickly after I give him those coordinates, the phone dies. And I go to the guy whose phone owns it. He's the tour operator. And I'm like, where's your charger? Like, we've got our solar panels. So we can just like get this phone going again. He's like, oh, I forgot to bring it because I've never needed to use it before. So there's no way to charge this phone back up. And I've just told my brother, like, there's an emergency situation. And there's like a war over here and guns over there. And then I just go dark. So my brother freaks out and he's like, oh my gosh, like my brother's going to die out here in the jungle. I got to do something. So he creates this whole like Save John Beede campaign. And all my friends start pulling every connection they possibly can until eventually it gets to John Kerry, the Secretary of State at the time. And he's dealing with stuff in Syria. So eventually he's just like there's this campaign of people pestering him and like calling his office and clogging up his phone lines. He's like, I have to deal with Syria. I can't deal with these people. I have no idea any of this is happening. But he's like, I can't deal with these hikers or these climbers out in Indonesia. So he's like, just get them out, deal with it. They end up pressuring the mine to like create a vehicle to take us out through the mine. So this guy shows up on a ridgeline and he starts screaming and he's like, get your shit together. You have no idea what kind of problem you've caused. And we didn't. Like, we're just sitting there in our, like, underneath this sheet of a shipping container waiting. Get your stuff together. Get in the bus. Get out. So they throw us in this armored vehicle and they cover up all the windows so that we can't see anything out. And then they drive us for like, I think it was an hour and a half through this mining operation because they don't want us to see the environmental destruction that's happening there. So they basically blind us by covering all the windows and take us out, and then we exit. I get back to my like civilization, think nothing's going on other than cool. We got out. I check my email and I have like hundreds and hundreds of messages like, "Are you alive? Tell us as soon as you're back." Like, yeah, like we just contacted the Secretary of State. We're getting like senators involved for your rescue operation. I'm like, dude, I was just sitting around basically in my underwear for the past 5 days, like just trying not to get shot by a bow and arrow. So it was a wild situation.
How many people were you with in that group?
I want to say there were 10 of us total.
Were the other people in that group trying to contact people as well, trying to get help, or was it kind of
Yeah.
like, was it put on your back to get help for everyone?
Well, there were some people from Ireland who were just like, we don't want any deal to be made of this at all. We just want to walk out. They didn't get their
Interesting.
boots stolen, so I'm like trying to help the people who had their boots stolen, who incidentally were the ones who were the jerks to the locals. Like they didn't give them a time of day. They wouldn't share food with them. And I'm like, well, karma's a bitch, right? I came back on them.
Was that
Um,
was that your most, would you say that was the most unique experience you've had in all your climbs?
Yeah, like I hope to never experience something quite as unique as that, but that was definitely like, what the heck was that all about? Yeah.
So fast forwarding now to Everest, what would have happened if you never crossed paths with Justin Murley when you were climbing Everest?
Yeah, good question. So Everest was before Indonesia by a couple of years, but to fill in for your listeners, on the way, I mean, I was above the Hillary Step, which is the last major feature on the way to the summit of Everest. And I'm ascending, and my prior oxygen canister had gone empty. It just was leaking, and we couldn't, me and the gentleman who I was with, Nuru Gyalzin Sherpa, we couldn't figure out why it was leaking. It was supposed to last for 10 hours. First one was gone in like 4. We found an extra bottle. We continue climbing, and then Nuru notices that my second bottle, the spare, is also leaking even after everything we had done. And we both made the decision jointly to turn back around, even being like maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes from the summit. So we start, I mean, we turn back around. I'm waiting above the Hillary Step to descend because there's only one way up the mountain and one way back down, and that's the Hillary Step. It's just a single path. So if one person here has an issue, everybody on the mountain's got an issue. But the first person to climb up is this climber who you mentioned, Justin. He's a guide for international mountain guides. And he's like, "Congratulations, man, you made it. You well done." I'm like, "I didn't make it. I got to turn back. Like, turning down because my oxygen's leaking." He pulls out his oxygen. He pulls out his tea bottle and he starts dipping my regulator into the tea. And the freezing, expanding liquid seals the leak. And he's like, "You're good to go. You can get up to the top now." Now, what had happened is there's a little ring. It's called a gasket. It's like a little rubber circle that stops air from seeping out. It got so cold that cracked, just like if you ever use a garden hose and you don't have a gasket in there, it'll just spray water everywhere. Same exact thing was happening with the oxygen. So had Justin not been there, um, we would have continued descending. Maybe I would have found somebody else who could have or would have been able to help, but Justin most likely saved my Everest summit. Um, Now, would I have like descended down and found a different oxygen bottle, knowing my personality, and later, like on a different day, tried to go back up? Yeah, or I would have at least like fought for it with the camp manager and like radioed down and been like, "Cool, I got another bottle. It's working now. I'm gonna give it another go." Um, but who knows, like what the weather would have done, or um, uh, what my body would have, the condition of my body would have been in, and whether I would have like had an even bigger issue the second time around. So the answer is Justin saved Everest.
How much time would have had to elapse if, let's say, you didn't reach the summit? Would What would have been the next time that you would have been able to climb Everest again?
I probably would have tried to do it the next day, but had I
Gotcha.
not been able to do it, like to give it because I would have already been at Camp 4, right? So I would have like climbed up higher, gone back to Camp 4, found a bottle that worked, and then probably gone back for it again. Now, had that not happened, or had that season not been the case, the next year would have been, there was a big earthquake. The year after that was an avalanche. I might be transposing those 2 years, but there was an avalanche, then an earthquake, and then following 2 years. And there have been, so had I attempted those next years, I probably wouldn't have made it. I probably would have drained my bank account so much. Like I have some buddies who tried for those 2 years straight, and then they just quit on it because they're like, "This is ridiculous. We're spending all this time. We're seeing all these traumatizing moments. We're just going to stop." So maybe I would have never finished the 7 summits. Maybe I would have just quit right there. It's so hard to say what could have or would have been, but it would have been at least 3 years later had I not finished that season.
I'm curious to know, from a quantifiable standpoint, for the amount of like actual climbing time it took for each of the summits, how much prep work and training time and physical training time went into that, do you think?
Great question. With Everest, it's super easy for me to quantify because I, for 9 months, trained like a professional athlete, and it was a 2 month expedition. So that is pretty, and I was ready. So that's pretty representative of most of the climbs that I've been on. So it's like Aconcagua. Let's say you spend 2 weeks in a day or two climbing. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to spend the same proportion of time, like a smaller amount of time climbing. It just depends on your fitness and your skill level, but most likely 4 to 12 months, depending on your fitness and how skilled you are, getting ready for the climb. And then a much smaller amount of time actually doing the climb. I like to say that you climb 80% of the mountain before you ever set foot on the mountain.
Interesting. And what does that particular training look like?
Every climb I go up has a summit push. Everest is 2,952 feet from Camp 4 to the summit. I don't want to rise up, like have that be an aspirational concept, like or like have that be like, can I do it? I want it to be my baseline. So there's this line on the wall of a gym in Thailand that I was training in Muay Thai kickboxing. And the line is, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, but we fall to the level of our training. And I took that to the mountains. So if I know that I've got a 2,952 foot summit push, I want that to be the baseline of my training. So every day that I trained, that was the bare minimum. It was on a stair stepper or in the mountains, climbing that altitude, or even like in a building. If I was staying in a hotel that day, I would go up and down the emergency exit stairs with a backpack on. And I tried to get that backpack up to 80 pounds so that I could carry 20 or 30 pounds on the mountain without issue. So I have this baseline, and then I stack on top of that lung expansion or lung training, which is usually in the form of swimming or interval training or bike sprints, so that my knees aren't taking the impact. But training my body to work well without a lot of oxygen is really the key. And swimming like across a pool and seeing how far I can go without taking a breath, and doing that for 9 months and continuing until it's like I can swim 3 or 4 laps at full strength without taking a breath. That's what I was building up to, so that when I'm on a mountaintop, I know that I'll be able to perform at this high level without needing to breathe a lot in order to make to be successful.
Did you ever have a coach or a trainer who helped you with all this, or was it kind of just stuff that you learned over time?
Swimming, my friend Tate Eklund, he basically coached me through all the swimming. He's a national level competitor. I went to high school with him, and we had climbed both Kilimanjaro independently, And then together we climbed Aconcagua when I successfully climbed it. So we become buddies by climbing together. And when he knew I was going to go to Everest, he's like, let me like help you out with the swimming side of it. With the interval training side of it, a friend named Alan, he's got this program called 8 Strikes in Las Vegas here. It's kind of a cardio kickboxing class. And he set me aside with like, here's how to expand your lungs with cardio kickboxing. I read many, many books like Freedom of the Hills, which is a classic mountain. It's like the mountaineering Bible that talks about training, and read all the books I could. So it's kind of this like combination coach, if I could tell you that. Like swimming is one aspect of it with one coach there, and the lung expansion with Alan, different coach there. Guy I found on a few books, taught me like coach there. And I think that's really representative of how coaching works for all of us. Like we don't have just like, here's the one person who is my guru that teaches me all the things I need to know for life. It's like that person has this aspect of life figured out. I'll follow what they have to say for that aspect of life. And that doesn't put too much pressure on any one like person to be this god for us. Like everybody's got their flaws, and if you follow one person's life too closely, you'll start to see those flaws, and then you'll like get really jaded about that life. So I found this to be a really helpful concept of like choose many gurus, but compartmentalize them. That's my guru for fitness. That's my guru for finance. That's my guru for like, and then micro niche it. Like that's my guru for lung expansion of fitness. So that's my guru for you find these tiny, tiny little aspects that you want to improve in, and find the one person who can help you with that one aspect. That's more realistic for coaches in my experience.
That's pretty cool because it almost, hearing you talk about that, it makes it seem like you can almost say climbing is a team sport in a way where you have all these coaches that are helping you.
Even free solo climbers, like look at Alex Honnold. He goes and climbs El Capitan. Everybody's like, he did it on his own. Did he though? Like before him, there were other climbers who set the route. Who set the route he climbed. He had Jimmy Chin with him, who was filming. He had his whole team who was like helping him along the way to make this film out of the thing. He had other climbers who were his partners in preparing to free solo it, like his belayers were. As he practiced this climb dozens and dozens of times, he had people who were holding him on the rope. It wasn't a solo effort. Maybe the pinnacle moment was, but the path to get there is for sure a team sport for every climber.
I mean, climbing to this degree is obviously no small undertaking with the amount of work and the training, and I would assume the amount of time you just think about climbing and thinking about the work that goes into it. Over the course of your life, what do you think the biggest sacrifice is that you've made to achieve all your climbing accomplishments?
The short answer is like the alternate life I could have chosen. Like had I not climbed, I'm just making it up, but would I have spent all the money that I spent on climbing on a house down payment? And would I be like, or would I have bought Bitcoin with it? Or would I have like gotten married and been, have settled down in my early 20s when I had a girlfriend who I left so that I could go climb? Like all these what if stories of what my life could have been. I could conjecture what life might be looking like forever on that aspect. So the sacrifice was just the other life.
Do you ever wish that you went down that other life, or do you like the choices that you've made?
I'm happy with my life and who I am today. Do I ever wish? Yeah, of course. Like sometimes I'm like, man, what if I had kids that were like teenagers by now? That would have been pretty cool. Maybe my kids would be awesome. Maybe they would be little shits. Like, who knows? Do I wish that? Well, let's just be honest. Everybody wishes they had bought Bitcoin when it was like $1. Like, so do I regret that? Yes, absolutely. But would I be having this conversation with you right now had any of those stories happened? Would I have my sense of peace surrounding death had any of those other alternatives happened? Would I have the drive I have today? Would I have the friendships that I have today? Would anything about me be the same in any of these alternate universes? And the answer is no. So to say that I regret those choices is also to say I don't like who I am currently, but I do. So yeah, do I like ever wonder? Yes, but who doesn't? Uh, do I accept and really like love where I've gotten to? Also, yes.
One of these great quotes that I heard from you talking about climbing is how you said that you don't necessarily have to go on these great adventures anymore to find that feeling of energy. Do you think that is one of the benefits of climbing is that you don't necessarily have to continue to climb to find that energy in other parts of your life?
I think that you win at many things in life, climbing included in one of them, by not needing it anymore. Um, like I think you win at dating by getting married, right? And then you don't need dating anymore. That's like maybe an easy analogy.
I think that's very succinctly put and something that I
Mm,
definitely would agree with in parts of my life where I'm big into lifting weights. And I felt like there was a point in my life where I always thought, I'm like, wow, like this is just, I'm always going to be obsessed with lifting weights. But I feel like I've gotten to a point now where I have the benefits of working out and I know
mm-hmm.
the mentality and sort of the work ethic that has gone into that. And now able to take all the benefits from that and put it into other areas of my life. And I think that is strong to be able to say, I don't need this anymore. Um, and
So
I've
it doesn't
never,
mean you're not gonna lift weights anymore. Like it's still something that you can enjoy and still
yeah,
something you're gonna love. But you won at weightlifting by getting what you needed out of it.
I've never thought of it
And
that way, but that's 100% correct.
and there will be something else in your life that you're like you get excited about and passionate about and trying to like solve the puzzle of, and how do I use this thing in my, or what is this, like why am I drawn to this? And then you'll win at that thing, and then suddenly like you can still do it and you can still enjoy it, but you don't need it anymore. That's what that's where I'm at with climbing.
That's awesome. And that's definitely another point that I want to talk about with you more a little bit later. But before that, I just want to get into your last climb of the final seven summits. Um, Probably the one that I'm most interested about, actually. So you were homeless and ruptured both of your Achilles leading up to that climb. I'm curious to know, how did you rupture your Achilles and how did these events prep you for the challenge ahead with Vincent
Yeah.
Mastiff?
So I split up with the woman I was dating uh, because she didn't want me to climb the mountain essentially. Um, so I moved into my truck and was just like training and adventuring out of the truck. So that's the context for being homeless. So the Achilles, so I'm training for it, and I was cycling down the Oregon coast, uh, and because I was pushing too hard and trying to like work out emotionally all this like this drama that was going on in my life, I just pushed too hard, and both of my Achilles had ruptured. So that was about 6 months prior to the climb, um, maybe a little bit more. So they were both busted, and I knew that like I already committed to like leaving this relationship to go after the climb. So I'm like, I still got to go after it, and that was how it happened, and that was the lead up to it.
Did your girlfriend at the time give you a specific reason for why she didn't want you to climb?
She did. She thought that it was me choosing time away from the partnership and therefore it was a decision against us and her. My perspective is that relationships are about supporting individuals. So if this is something that, like, if somebody else wanted something, I would support them. And even if it meant not physically being with me, I think that's great if you want to go after something. So that's how the difference of our values came to a clash or a head.
When going into all of your climbs, did you always have the mindset of wanting to film them and make documentary videos out of them?
It kind of started with just like, I want to journal. And it's my brain isn't functioning well enough at high altitude to be able to like write clearly. So it just became a lot easier to pull out a camera and be like, here's what's going on here. And then I thought I would later journal about this thing. And it turns out that the video is often more compelling than the writing ever would have been. So that's how it started. And then by the end of the, like, as I continued climbing, I'm like, okay, the video is actually really cool. So I just then became about like, let me just document this for the sake of the video itself.
Yeah, I watched all of them and they're all incredibly well made. And I love the voiceovers that you do for all of them. And my favorite line from not only your Vincent Massif video, but probably all your climbing videos is that you say, all mountains offer a path to their summit, yet a mountaineer's true challenge is to let the mountain peel back your false layers and watch as it lays bare for you who you are at your core. I'm intrigued by this concept of false layers. Do you think all of us have false layers at the surface?
I do.
I agree with you as well.
I think that our social conditioning, I think that our understanding of what we think other people's expectations on us are, um, I think that our societies, our cultures, our friend groups all give us these ideas of who we think we're supposed to be, and they're not necessarily our authentic selves. So what I meant by that line is, when your body gets so exhausted that you're that it affects your brain, and like, when you're so tired that the only thing left is your spirit, and each step is not based on like whether you have the strength for it, but your willpower. When you're that exhausted, like the same as a guy who's in a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean and he's like only surviving just on willpower, when you get to that level of exhaustion, it is you, like your core you self, who then is exposed, because everything else is obliterated. This is the same feeling that can happen in a yoga class that I imagine could happen in an Olympic level athlete or a marathon runner. When there's nothing left but the willpower, that's when you can find who you really are. If you've never experienced this before, I don't know that I can like explain what it is, but there's definitely a moment when you're like, the only thing left is me, because everything else that's not me is so tired that it's dead. It's gone. That's what I felt and feel in the mountains.
That's so beautifully said. Do you feel like that's the main thing that you're able to take with you from the mountains?
It's definitely one of those things. Um, there's a book called The Untethered Soul. It's by Michael Singer. And in this book, he talks about, he calls this thing that I'm referring to, he names it the witness. And the concept is, if you're really, really angry, instead of feeling that anger and being in that anger, if you notice that you're angry, simply by the fact of noticing it, that tells you that you are not the anger. You're not like encompassed by this thing. You are the thing that notices the anger. Um, I've been able to do this better as a result of climbing. So that's one of the things I took from it is be like into my regular everyday life is I'm able to like distinguish, okay, in this scenario, whatever this may be, what is actually me and what is false me, and how do I live more as actually me. I'm better able to do it because I've spent more time exhausted in the mountains as me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Is there one climb in particular that you think peeled back your false layers more than others?
That's a great question. That would have been Everest because on a daily basis for 2 months, I reached that point of physical exhaustion. The others, just by virtue of being shorter, there were fewer opportunities to get that feeling. Everest being right up against like death so many times and being so tired for 60 days straight, that one for sure showed me who I am and what I'm made of.
So going back to Vincent Massif, you say in your documentary video, and also tying it back to your girlfriend at the time, you said, I slowly realized that more painful than ending a great love would be to end my own sense of identity. I took a hard stance that I don't want to be with someone who just tolerates my time in these cathedrals. I want to be with someone who celebrates it. So I'm curious to know, and you also said that you potentially thought that you were going to propose um, at the summit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know, why did you find it was so important to share these life details in these videos about you, the climber, rather than simply just talking about the details of the climb?
Um, because the details of the climb is myopic. It's it's only a slice of what climbing is in my own experience. Um, Climbing is about working through your own struggles. It's about bringing everything going on in your life to the mountain, and then like there's a way that the mountain has of resolving it or helping each climber to work through it. These things. So to not talk about what I've struggled with, I feel is limiting to climbing. Like to say, I'm in the snow, putting a foot in front of the other, and I'm putting my goggles on. Like that's the technical aspect of it, but it doesn't cover the heart aspect of what's happening for a climber. So I wanted to somehow be able to reveal like the spirit or the heart of climbing, even at the risk of looking vulnerable or oversharing or sharing some details that some people are like could say like this is totally irrelevant to climbing. To me it's not. That's all the climbing, and that's like why the climbing exists, because it's a canvas for us to be able to process through these things.
Yeah, I mean, I've never climbed to the extent that you have, and I would probably assume that I never will, but I have gone on some hikes before. And like we were speaking about earlier, yeah, I mean, there's a deep psychological and emotional side of climbing that you can't separate from, like you're saying, just the technical side.
Yeah, like hiking that you've done, you've experienced that same thing. I mean, you look at what was that movie and the book with Reese Witherspoon? Like she does the Pacific Coast Trail to like sort through her emotional drama. Do you remember this book?
No, I don't actually.
So this character in the book hikes the Pacific Coast Trail to like put the death of her mother to bed and her failed relationship. Um, so my point with this is that it doesn't have to be a mountain that somebody listening uses to like find a canvas. It could be playing tennis. It could be yoga. It could be weightlifting in your case in the gym. But having this holy time or this, I guess, space where that's your world to work through what's going on in your life, I think every person needs to have this.
Do you ever go solo climbing?
I do. So not vertical solo like free solo climbing, but I
Yeah,
go
but
on my own into the mountains to hike.
how does the experience, if it does in any way, how does it differ from when you're climbing with others?
It's never as fun. Uh, I definitely get more when I'm on my own. It's more solemn, and it's more like there's a tone of melancholy to it. So I way prefer climbing with other people. It does allow me to reflect on my life with a little bit more space, like through conversation. You know, it takes a little while longer for two people to get to that like introspective level together. But overall, I definitely prefer being with a team and a crew, and it's more representative of real life when you're climbing with other people. Like your life, it's not a solo experience. So to go into the mountains and like make it this little microcosm of what life could be, it's not representative. You can treat it as like an escape or a getaway, but I like to think that each climb is like a mini life that we all get to live. Like you start and you're all excited and you're like, oh, here we go. Like a little baby wakes up and they start crying, like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And you become a teenager. And same thing in the mountains. And you're just sort of like, okay, I'm too cool for this. Like, here we go. Like, I'm going to make this happen. You get sort of arrogant and you're like, I got this, no problem. And then you get a little humbled. And like, that's the equivalent to your 20s and 30s. Like, man, this is tired. This is hard. Then you sort of like succeed or you hit the pinnacle, which I think happens for most people in their 40s, 50s, at least professionally. But that's sort of when you get a real sense of like, this is who I am and who I've become. And then you start descending, and on your way out, that's your death. That's your retirement or your way towards it. And then you get back in your car, and I guess that's your equivalent to your death. It's done. So
So going off of that, you climb Vincent Massif. It's the last peak that you need for the seven highest summits across the world on each continent. You get back home into everyday life. How do you reacclimate to life knowing that the job was finished, so to speak?
to me, it wasn't that long ago. So I'm still figuring that part out. It definitely took a couple of years of like when all the astronauts of the first well, I think it was Apollo, was it 11 maybe, that was the first to the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin.
Yep.
When they all came back, not only the astronauts but the team, the crew, almost unanimously experienced a level of depression because they had this big goal and they didn't really have anything planned next. Like, we did it, now what? I experienced something similar. Like, I did it, great, and I had other goals, but it was still sort of like, but now what? Like, what's the next big thing? In in cross applying the character lessons that I learned on the mountains to more, I guess, I don't want to say regular, but in other life experiences, that's like what I'm learning is the thing that's next for me. So in buying a real estate transaction, how do I take what I learned in the mountains and apply it to business? Uh, when I'm giving a presentation on stage, how do I take like the discipline of training for the mountains and apply that same training to perfecting my speech as best I humanly can? So these little takeaways, putting them into the other life scenarios are kind of like my what's next thing.
Getting into the relationship between the passion for mountaineering versus the business of mountaineering. I know you've guided some people up Kilimanjaro, but you said there's a level of self awareness that everybody needs to look at. Which of the aspects of my life are draining me and which are energizing me? And I know that you have this deep passion for climbing, but that really didn't relate to the business side of mountaineering as well. And I believe that what you love doesn't necessarily have to be who you are or what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Was it ever a challenge for you at all to get past the idea of like, hey, I'm more than just a guy who climbed the highest mountains. I have much more to offer to the world than just sharing climbing stories.
I'm so glad you asked this because this is like my actual real talk. This is my struggle with my speaking business right now. I would love to talk more than just about climbing, but that's also probably the most objectively interesting thing about my story. So, how do I create this? Like, my brand has been all about just promoting this climbing thing. I play chess. I go kite surfing. I read obsessively. I weightlift. I lift weights as well. I'm a yoga instructor. I'm a kite surfing instructor too. So with all these other things I've got, like sometimes I do feel limited in that, like the thing that people are most interested in is the climbing aspect of it. But there's so many other rich parts of life and like aspects that I want to like that make me a full human being.
What's one of the main things that you would love to give a talk on that's something that's completely separate from climbing or doesn't even matter?
Letting go, like quitting. And I can flesh this out. I I think climbing teaches us like go for it and like it's got this aspect of like get to the top at all costs. Sometimes we can go up the wrong mountains, but to not even consider like the mountaineering analogy, I think that often we can just get locked on to like this concept of never quit, never give up. Sometimes there's a relationship that you need to quit. You need to give that thing up. Sometimes there's a job that's not right for you. Sometimes there's a career path that is like, you shouldn't be going down that direction. Sometimes there's a friendship that you got to cut the cord with. Sometimes there's a car you got to sell. Sometimes there's a like endless description of what I could like bring up as examples here. Quitting is okay. Quitting is often good, but this seems so contradictory to to climbing. It feels so contradictory to what we're taught in life. But the key is not just quit, quit, quit and do nothing. It's quit so that you have the space and the energy and the capacity to go after the things that matter more. That's a talk that I would give.
Everything that you just said there is all stuff that I resonate with on a very, very deep level. And I would love to hear you give a talk on that because I believe the exact same thing. I quit a job and it was probably the most empowering and enriching experiences in my life. And I realized because we always have this understanding of quitting as taking a step back, like in a bad way, like, oh,
Yeah.
instead of, and I realized, I said, if quitting makes you take a step back to get to a place in life that you actually want to be, why isn't that a massive step forward?
I love it. Yeah.
Because, yeah, we just have this very negative understanding of quitting because we feel
Hmm.
like if we're quitting, oh, it means I'm weak, I'm a failure. But it can be you taking ownership of your life. And we don't see it as that way.
You nailed it. Couldn't say it better. Can't even expand on it better. Like you just you own that concept.
So I guess we'll tag team
I'll quote you when I give the speech.
we'll tag team the talk.
All right, deal.
So you've also getting more so into stepping away from climbing and getting into your life now. You've written 3 books and have said books like Essentialism by by Greg McEwen and Breathe by James Nestor have had a big impact on you. But you've also said, and this is a tweet that you wrote out, I think a decade ago now. You said, make your journal the best book you'll ever read. Are there any notes or messages that you've written to yourself that have had a lasting impact?
I think every time that I've gone back to read my journal, I've either been reminded of something that I needed to hear now, which has been useful, or I've been like so embarrassed, like ashamed that I would have ever thought something like that, or like, uh, I guess at the immaturity of what I have written, like because it's from a past self, right? Same as you'd look at like a 5-year-old writing a journal. Like when you're 40, you look back at your 20-year-old stuff and you're like, it was kind of immature then. And then it's been a highlight of how much I've grown. So a journal is amazing because you get to teach your current self what old you knew that you've forgotten that you need, and it's a measuring stick of like how far you've come simultaneously. So is there any one line? Nothing jumps out as like that's the thing, but these two kind of counter opposed concepts are why I find journaling so valuable.
Another thing that love that you said, and I heard it in a podcast, you said, love the idiot phase. And you were talking about getting back in touch with who you were as a child. And that's another thing that I really resonated with. When we're young kids, we don't know what failing is. We don't know what quitting is. We're just happy, lucky little people who are just going to act and do whatever we want on any given day and just keep doing stuff and trying new things and not being afraid of failing or making a mistake or looking stupid. In what ways do you feel like you've stayed in your idiot phase? In the kindest
the
way possible of asking that.
Yeah, that's why I laughed because um, it sounds like a mean question, but the honest answer is in every way. Like once you stop loving that phase of like being a beginner, it's called the growth mindset or the the beginner's mindset or the fixed mindset is kind of the difference. If you have a fixed mindset, it's like, I got it all. I'm set. I've known everything. And the second you say that, you stop yourself from growing in any way because you know it. Okay, great. You know it all. There's nothing else for you to learn. But if you have a childlike mindset or growth mindset, or as I call it, the idiot, like loving the idiot phase, if you're always thinking like I'm an idiot with this, there's always room to grow and to learn. So the second that I start thinking like, oh, I've got this dialed, I've got this figured out, I try and keep that as a wake up call to myself. No, like in what ways or in what aspect are you still an idiot here? And which and it sounds mean, but like in where are there still opportunities for growth? Reduce your like level of ego here and get back into the beginner's mindset so that I can get all the benefits you just mentioned. That's the only way that we can keep growing is first with this mindset of loving. Like you go into a dance class, you don't know the moves. Are you feeling shame because I look silly to everybody else? Or is it like this is so fun? I feel like foolish, but like can you laugh at yourself because you don't know and because of how goofy you think you might look? That's the distinction, and I want that feeling of being in a dance class and giggling at how ridiculous and silly it is for everything. And ultimately, like we're all making it up as we go. Like we don't. There's no like this is how life is path. Everybody's just like inventing life as we go along. So you can either get into this spot of like, life sucks, I'm too serious, I've got it all figured out, or like, this is ridiculous. The fact that we're on a little dot in the middle of blackness floating around a sun that's exploding and burning. Like what is this thing? It's just, that's our existence. You can look at that and be like, we're all just figuring it out. That's the idiot phase. And that's how you grow.
It's all about peeling back those false layers, like we were saying. And
Yeah.
I think it's a massive part of just reframing the way that you look at trying something new. When trying something new, yes, the ego is naturally going to try to take over and be like, oh, why aren't I the best at this? Or why aren't I, succeeding at this? Just for me personally, especially like with this podcast, when I was getting it off the ground, I made sure that my mindset stayed kind of in that idiot phase of
Mm.
I'm not supposed to be good at this. Like I'm supposed to be trying to figure this out. I've never done this before. Like
Yes.
why would I be putting my pressure on myself for something that I've never done before? Why would I be comparing myself to other people who've been doing this for a decade longer than me? Like I'm supposed to be bad at this, so play into that bad side of things. And I believe that if you want to be good at something, you got to be willing to be bad at it first. You don't become good at something just right away.
So let's take this podcasting example forward. You get to 10,000 subscribers and it sort of, let's say it flatlines or it becomes stagnant for your subscriber growth. You may have in that moment get overly confident, like I've got this thing figured out. That's a cue for yourself to like, where am I an idiot here? And then, okay, and then once you figure that lesson out, let's say it spikes up to 100,000, same exact thing. Let's say you beat Joe Rogan and you're like the number one podcast out there. Then you'll still be able to hit a like, where am I an idiot? What don't I know? And if you continue to have this insight of like, what don't I know? Where's the room for growth? You will continue to hit those to break through those plateaus and hit those new highs. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's also a very humbling experience to be able to think and act like that way, to
Mm.
not get too high on yourself by basically saying, I'm always going to be a student of the game rather than, oh, I'm a master now and I have it all figured out.
Totally. Like, I don't know how much Michael Jordan beat all the records by, but let's say he beat the points per game record by 1. If he just stopped there and did it, cool, he wouldn't necessarily be the greatest of all time. There'd probably be a lot of debate over like, was it him or the other guy? Like he only beat him by 1. Maybe it was like timing, or maybe it was like because of the era he played in, all these arguments that get made. But if it's like he continued to be a student and totally blew them all out of the water, like the only way you can get there is by having this growth mindset and by not making other people your standard, but by making your own standard newer and like change it and outdo yourself over and over. So eventually, like it's not just about overcoming others; it's about overcoming where you've put your own standard. Once you're to the very, very, very top.
You've just beautifully described what my whole mission with this podcast is and the name behind it, the Outworker. And I know I've written about this to you before, is we have this concept of outworking as it has to be in relation to other people, where
Mm-hmm.
if I outwork, it's got to be like, oh, I'm outworking the competition, I'm outworking somebody else. But like what you were saying, and there's this quote from Michael Jordan that I love. He says, my competition isn't other people, and my competition is what I'm capable of.
Mm.
And it's a totally internal, singular process. I believe that's what it truly takes to see how far you can take yourself in life and how far you can grow. It's got to come from within. And I would feel like it's got to be like that. You know, you can have a team with climbing and you can have coaches helping you, but I would have to believe that it's got to come from within.
So another aspect of this that I think is important is not all of us, most of us, in fact, are not going to be the Michael Jordan, not only of basketball, but of anything. There are better climbers out there than me. There are stronger climbers. There are climbers who will go after more difficult mountains. There's some Sherpa who've climbed Everest 30 times. I did it once. The the thing I'm getting at is when we're with competition with ourselves and going after our own best, it's also okay to have a lower standard and know that that's your best and just be cool with that. Like if you're selling real estate and there's some person like in the state of Maine who's selling 100 properties a year, and in your state, like, or your town, like 20 is good for you in a year, be cool with that. Like you don't have to be in competition with anybody over anything. All you got to do is enjoy it and be progressing yourself. So there's this balance of like seeing others of what's capable and possible and being inspired by them. But I'm never going to slam dunk a basketball like Michael Jordan. It doesn't mean I can't go out and be the best. Like if I love basketball, be the best player that I can be, and be like find out who I'll become as a result of that basketball journey. Same with mountaineering, same with real estate, same with starting a podcast. If it's the best you've got, that's your standard, and it's such like a delicate balancing act over seeing others as inspiration, but not as like your benchmark for where you want to take your life.
I completely agree. And I think one of the biggest reasons why people struggle with that is because we're so quick to just look at people's accomplishments. Because it's so easy to look at Michael Jordan and say, yeah, look at all these MVPs, look at all these finals championships trophies. Like you were saying, none of us or most of us are never going to be in that position to win an NBA MVP. But can you use a Michael Jordan's mentality? Can you
Yeah.
use his work ethic? Can you use the obsession that he had for his craft? Those are all things that you can take. Yes, you might not be able to relate with the accomplishments of Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan, the person, and sort of the, I guess, the EQ side of him, would you be able to take that and use it to your advantage? 100%.
I hope that someone listening to a speech of mine or watching a video would take the same thing of like, you don't have to climb the seven summits in order to glean some of these lessons. In fact, I hope I can help you to not need to climb the mountains in order to get these lessons of, that we've talked about throughout this conversation.
My favorite quote from you: the mountains will never lower themselves to your level, but you must rise up to the demands presented to you by the climb. Where does it feel like you're climbing towards next?
It feels like I'm developing some level of community next that is like, it's not necessarily my own family, but it's finding like-minded individuals who are cool with having conversations like this on a daily basis and will go there, uh, and getting them physically into the same place. Like that's the thing that I can tell I'm wanting and craving most, and wanting to be a part of. So I don't know if that's going to be me linking into a group who's already doing this, or if it's like forming it from the beginning. Um, but like the hey, how you doing? I'm doing great, thanks. Like let's go have a beer sometime. Great, talk to you then. Like that's not doing it for me. Um, and that depth of community is what I'm seeking, and what I can just tell is going to be next.
Why do you think it's such a challenge to find that? Because I think it is.
I'm glad you're honest, because I do too. Um, I think people who have done the work to get to a place where they're comfortable with that is pretty rare. Those who I have found who will go there and experience like live like that are scattered all across the world. So they're like in dots. Like where are you physically right now?
I'm in Connecticut.
You're in Connecticut. I'm in Vegas. I got a buddy who's in like South Africa. I got a buddy who's in England who'll go there. A couple of buddies in the Pacific Northwest. So they're scattered. So the why is I just think it's a rare individual. The solution I don't know yet, and that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Completely agree with you. And that was one of the main motivations of wanting to start this podcast, is researching and finding people like that. So it could allow for the platform to have these types of deep conversations, not for me, just for me, but for other individuals like yourself. And I hope that you found this conversation was fulfilling enough, or part of that sort of community aspect that you're looking for.
Yeah, Tim, man, I can't commend you enough for what you're creating with this, and the concept in itself is a beautiful one, and to convey this outworker mentality to many by tracking down and thinking very carefully about the questions you want to ask people who have performed well in any specific realm of living. It's awesome what you're doing, and you're creating these like digital connections to these communities virtually. So I hope that we can continue to connect as we both progress.
Would absolutely love that, John, and appreciate you for coming on the Outworker.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thanks again for all the great questions, and we'll talk to you next time.